Please have a seat. So, this is, I didn't want to bring this up in front of your squad, but...
I mean, if you guys are claiming that I'm a suspect, then, I got a problem with that.
For 23 years, the Los Angeles Police Department had a simple answer for what happened to Sherri Rasmussen. A burglary gone wrong. Two intruders, surprised by a young woman who came home when she should have been at work, who panicked, killed her, and ran. That was the story in the file. That's what her family was told again and again for over 2 decades. There was just one problem. It wasn't true. And the people who could have known it wasn't true had a reason not to look too closely. Because the woman who beat and shot Sherri Rasmussen to death in her own living room carried a badge. She carried a gun the department had sold her. And for the next 23 years, she worked inside the very same police department that was supposed to be hunting her. This is the story of Sherri Rasmussen and the killer who hid in plain sight. Sherri Rasmussen was, by every account, extraordinary. She skipped grades as a child and started college at just 16. By her late 20s, she had earned a master's in nursing and become director of critical care nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center, a leadership role most people don't reach until far later. She was brilliant, driven, and warm. She was also nearly 6 feet tall, strong, and athletic, a detail that matters more than it should, because it's one reason her father never believed the official story. In 1984, she met a young engineer named John Rutan, and the two built the kind of life Sherri had always worked toward. In November of 1985, they married and moved into a condominium in Van Nuys. They were 3 months into their marriage, just getting started. She had everything in front of her. And there was a woman watching from the edges of that life who could not accept it. Her name was Stephanie Lazarus. She and John Rutan had met years earlier at UCLA, where they had a relationship. By Rutan's own testimony, it was casual. He said he never considered her his girlfriend. But their friends said Stephanie took it far more seriously than he did. After college, Lazarus joined the Los Angeles Police Department, becoming an officer in 1983. She bought, through the department, a .38 caliber revolver as her backup gun. Remember that detail. Even as her own life moved on, Lazarus did not let go of John. We know this from her own diary. When she learned he had become engaged to Sherri, she wrote that she just found out John was getting married and that she couldn't concentrate. That night she woke her roommate to cry. He said he'd never seen her cry before. In a letter to her mother, she wrote that she was truly in love with John and didn't think she'd ever understand his decision. And then it stopped being just a diary. According to the account Sherri gave her father, Lazarus came to the hospital where Sherri worked and told her she and John were still sleeping together, and that when the marriage fell apart, she'd be there to pick up the pieces. Sherri told her plainly her services wouldn't be needed, and as she left, Lazarus reportedly delivered a line that reads, in hindsight, like a death sentence. If she couldn't have John, no one else would, Sherri told her father. She confronted John, who admitted he'd slept with Lazarus even after the engagement and then did nothing to keep her away. He thought it would simply fade. It didn't. In January 1986, weeks before the murder, Lazarus showed up at the condo in uniform and armed to collect a pair of skis John had waxed for her. Later that month, Sherri came home to find Stephanie Lazarus standing inside her own living room, again in uniform. By early February, Sherri told her father she believed Lazarus was following her on the street, so understand this. Before she died, Sherri had identified the threat. She had named the person, and almost none of it would ever make it into the official police record. On the morning of February 24, 1986, John left for work around 7:20. Sherri, who'd hurt her back the day before, decided to stay home from work. She was alone. Around midday, a maid cleaning a nearby unit heard what sounded like 2 people fighting, then something falling. She thought it was a domestic argument and didn't call police. When John came home that evening, Sherri's car was gone. There was broken glass on the driveway, and inside he found his wife of 3 months dead on the living room floor. What had happened to her was savage. She'd been shot 3 times in the chest, the gun fired through a quilted blanket to muffle the sound. She'd been beaten badly with defensive wounds, the marks of someone who fought hard for her life. There were signs of a long, brutal struggle: a shattered vase, a toppled credenza, a bloody handprint near the alarm's panic button, and on her arm was a bite mark. The criminalist swabbed it for routine blood typing. At the time, it seemed minor. It would take 23 years to become the most important object in the entire case. The detectives reached their conclusion fast: a burglary interrupted. A stack of stereo equipment sat by the stairs as if someone had been gathering it. The car was gone. The theory wrote itself, but almost nothing fit. The jewelry box sat untouched in plain sight. The alarmed front door hadn't been forced. The struggle, by the lead detective's own estimate, lasted up to an hour and a half, far too long for thieves just after electronics. And one detail nagged. A bite during a violent struggle is far more often inflicted by a woman, while almost all burglars are men. Sherri's father, Nels, seized on every inconsistency. His daughter was tall and strong. The execution-style shooting, deliberately muffled, didn't read as a panicked accident. So he told detectives repeatedly about Stephanie Lazarus, the threats, the confrontations. They made a note, then dismissed it. When Nels wrote directly to the police chief raising the possibility an officer was involved, the response he got was that he watched too much television. The supposed burglars were never found. The case went cold, and it stayed cold for over 2 decades, while Stephanie Lazarus's name sat in that file, mentioned exactly once as a former girlfriend. In the years after the murder, Lazarus thrived. She was promoted to detective in 1994. She married a fellow officer, adopted a child, taught at the police academy, and eventually landed a coveted spot in the department's art theft unit. Her colleagues respected her. Here's the chilling part. During the 1990s, Lazarus was twice assigned to the Van Nuys division, where the original murder book on Sherri Rasmussen sat accessible in the detective's office. Colleagues recalled she often volunteered for unsupervised overnight shifts. We'll come back to what that might mean. Meanwhile, the evidence was inching toward the light. In the 2000s, as DNA technology advanced, a criminalist retested the old evidence, including that bite mark swab found almost lost in a freezer. The result detonated the case. The saliva belonged to a woman. In one stroke, the 20-year burglary theory built on 2 male intruders collapsed, but when she raised it, she was steered away. The evidence went back into the files for 4 more years. In 2008, a Van Nuys detective named Jim Nuttall pulled the old file and saw immediately what had been missed. The DNA pointed to a female killer. He and his partner started over, treating it as a murder staged to look like a burglary. The staging fell apart under scrutiny. That stack of stereo equipment, if the struggle had tumbled down the stairs as the evidence showed, would have been scattered, not neatly assembled. On top of it sat a blood stain with no fingerprint, suggesting gloves, and the blood was Sherri's. Someone had stacked it after the killing to fake a robbery. They built a list of 5 female suspects in Sherri's orbit and eliminated them one by one with DNA until only one was left. They didn't even say her name aloud anymore. They called her number 5. And number 5 was a serving LAPD detective, married to another detective, with friends across the department who could tip her off. So they went underground, working the case after hours, inventing cover stories. Then they needed her DNA, and because anyone discards trace DNA in public, they didn't even need a warrant. They followed her. At a Costco, off-duty, Stephanie Lazarus drank from a cup and threw it away. Officers retrieved it. The saliva matched the bite mark on Sherri Rasmussen's arm. What happened next was carefully orchestrated, because the suspect knew every interrogation trick herself. 2 detectives chosen for having no connection to her called her to police headquarters, telling her it was about an art theft. To enter, she had to surrender her gun. In the interview, they gently revealed it was really about the old Rasmussen case. She claimed the years had blurred her memory, then slowly let slip more and more, acknowledging visits to the condo and to Sherri's workplace, until she accused them of treating her as a suspect. When they mentioned DNA and asked for a sample, she said she needed to speak to someone first and got up to leave. She was arrested as she walked out. When they searched her home, they found her old diary, full of her anguish over John, and her computer showed she'd searched his name online years later, long after she was supposedly over him. The case became a national sensation, a love triangle, a cold case unsolved for over 20 years, and the killer revealed to be a police detective. At the 2012 trial, prosecutors argued the motive was jealousy. One prosecutor summed it up as a bite, a bullet, a gun barrel, and a broken heart. John Ruetten testified, weeping, admitting that sleeping with Lazarus after his engagement had been a mistake. The defense fought hard, reviving the burglary theory and attacking the decades-old DNA as possibly contaminated. In March 2012, the jury convicted Stephanie Lazarus of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 27 years to life. At a related hearing, John Ruetten spoke of the unbearable weight of knowing his wife had died simply because she had met and married him. Her appeals failed, and the conviction stood. As the case unfolded, something disturbing surfaced. The LAPD's own file was incomplete in ways hard to explain as mere sloppiness. Interviews with Nels and John that discussed Lazarus were missing. The handwritten records from the first crucial months were simply gone. And remember, Lazarus had twice worked in the very division where that file was kept, often alone on overnight shifts. Whether records were destroyed or just lost has never been proven, but the questions have never gone away. For decades, Lazarus insisted she was innocent. That changed only when a California law offered parole consideration for crimes committed under age 26. At a 2023 hearing, she finally admitted it, saying it sickened her that she'd taken an oath to protect people and instead took the life of a nurse. She claimed she'd only gone to the condo to see John and lost control. But when pressed on her own account, even she conceded it made no sense. A parole panel recommended her release, but Sherri's family and John fought it. A detective testified that the planning and the cover-up were not the hallmarks of a youthful mistake, but of criminal sophistication. And the board heard a video Sherri Rasmussen had recorded before his death, the father who named Lazarus from the very beginning. Looking at the damage done to his daughter's face, he said it was almost as if she'd wanted to destroy the beauty Sherri radiated. The parole grant was rescinded. A further request was denied. Stephanie Lazarus remains behind bars, eligible to try again in 2028 in the end. This case turns on a terrible irony. The institution that failed Sherri Rasmussen, that dismissed her father and clung to a false theory for 23 years, was the same institution the killer hid inside. It took a bite mark she never expected, a swab forgotten in a freezer, and a father who would not stop saying a name for the truth to finally surface. Sherri was 29. She saw the danger coming. She said its name out loud. And the people whose job it was to protect her looked the other way because the danger wore the same uniform they did. That is the story of Sherri Rasmussen. May she rest in peace.